welcome everyone. I'm Phyllis Klein, and this is Poets in Conversation. And we may have some more people coming in as we're talking, so we'll welcome them as they come in. To get started, I'm going to read something, and then I'll introduce Andy, who's going to go first, and then Jeanne will read. So I'm going to read from my book, which is it's a poetry newspaper, and I thought I would read. This has been in the news a lot lately about all the inhumanity that we have going on here in this country. So I thought I'd read. This is the last poem in my book, and it's called "Holding a Place for Human Kindness to Go." Strangers until the homeless man moves into the rancher's apartment, the one he decided to build on his land, generous with California oak woodlands, with coastal sage scrubs. The rancher wonders, why doesn't everyone do this? He doesn't realize it is greatness to see potential when everyone else sees menace, those immigrants invading like Mediterranean grasses, Spanish broom, yellow star thistle. Weed them out, those seekers, or the downtrodden, downthrusted, the ones bereft of four walls, invading the city, choking out the libraries, the beaches. And the homeless man who has a roof now doesn't realize his life is a poem when he says, living on the streets takes your dignity away. How his life was on the edge of felling, so much like a weed in a garden, he could pluck himself out. And now he lives in a new home on a ranch near a person who takes a risk, digs a foundation, offers the horses, the owls, the steelheads, also endangered. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce our first reader, Andy Fogle. And here's what I'm going to say about Andy. Andy Fogle was born in Norfolk, Virginia. He grew up in Virginia Beach and lived for a decade in Northern Virginia, teaching for the DC Creative Writing Workshop, DC Writers Corps, and George Mason University, where he earned a BA in English and an MFA in creative writing. About himself, he says, I'm part postmodernist and part just goofy. He has been an educator for over 20 years and now lives in upstate New York with his wife and 2 children. And he teaches English at a high school and is also a doctoral student in curriculum and instruction at SUNY Albany. It's just a little busy. So he's appeared in many journals, and he's actually written 6 chapbooks. And tonight he's going to be reading from his current book, Across from Now, which is grounded in his move from Virginia to New York as he fretted between times and places, between here and now, and there and then, trying to make a little beauty out of impermanence. So here's Andy.
All right. Thanks a lot, Phyllis. I appreciate being here. I'm just admitting a couple of my people.
Oh, good. Okay, I'll admit change. Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is the first feature that I've done in a long time, at least 2 or 3 years. And it's just nice to see some folks, some close folks from the long ago showing up. And this is also a close folk, but from the, not so long ago. This is Penelope. She's going to hang out and probably mess with me, but I think I'm going to hang in there just fine. Don't mess with me too much. This first one's, and I'm also really glad to be reading with you, Jeanne. There were so many poems that were just absolute knockouts in your book. All right, this first one's called Field Trip. It's the longest one that I'll read. At least I think it's the longest. And I went on a field trip with my son to this place called Up Yonda Farm. It's near Lake George here in upstate New York. Two things I guess I mentioned. No, just one thing that's in the poem. I mentioned a lake, and I mentioned its native translation, and that is Lake George up here in the Adirondacks. Here's Field Trip. According to a museum placard, the jack pine's serotonin cones need fire-hot temperatures to release their seeds, and so can reproduce immensely after a forest fire. This upstate pond is where Juliana catches the biggest baby sunfish anybody has ever seen in their 8 years on the planet, and where tadpoles feel like jello. Under the mama crayfish's tail, it's packed with tiny purple beads like grapes or eggs. This is where Ava gives me her drawing from the museum, signs it on a picnic table in the pavilion. I doze on the bus both ways, but I catch one kid cry upon arrival, "We're here!" And when we leave, "We're going back in time. Goodbye, future. We'll miss you." This is the world my son has brought me to. It's where Sam C. made out just fine without his hiking boots. White birch, like a statue of ash popping among dark hemlocks. This is where Isabella picks a dozen blue wildflowers on Green Trail Spur, between two forests where you can see the lake called by the Mohawk, Onondaga, and Iroquois, where the lake is closed in by mountains, or the lake that shuts itself in. According to the placard, the jack pine can reproduce intensely after a forest fire because of the fire. This is a real short one. I grew up in Virginia Beach. That's an hour away from Gloucester, Virginia, which is where my mom grew up. And so we would, often take trips back to see her dad and her many aunts and uncles. And she and her dad had this this ritual when we would leave their house and drive back to Virginia Beach. My mom would call his house. This is back in the days of rotary phones and long distance and stuff. And, she would let the phone ring one time and she would hang up. And that was her signal to her dad that I got home safe. This is called One Ring. Yes, Jen, I believe I did see Silvana show up in here. See that? Here's One Ring. Back when phones still had bells inside them and plugged into walls. Back when we were tethered to the box, we'd get home from Poppy's and Ma would call, let it ring once and hang up. This gone, all clear signal, a call cut short, unanswered, no talk, and the worried father an hour away could listen, count, and breathe easy at the nothing that followed a little. I live in Saratoga Springs, and one of our favorite places is a place called Winnie's Blueberry Farm. It is about a mile, east of this place called Fish Creek, and it's a mile west of the Hudson River. And the backfield, the main field, sort of backs up against the back of this place called the Bacon Hill Reformed Church. And I was picking blueberries there with my mom long ago. This poem quickly jumps around between a few different memories of bad news. And it was a couple weeks after my mom had been in the hospital. This is years ago. 2 weeks after the hospital, picking Draper blueberries, the short bushes are the fullest. Grandma Brown used to say, "You got to bend it back and get right in there like this." Amidst broken hearts and blindness, another grandmother nursed her dying daughter. I was the one to phone my father with news of his father's death. He had been in a good mood. "Hey, boy," and then speechless against the loading ramp's plangent wash. These are not the natural orders of things. But beyond the field's far corner, the Bacon Hill Reformed Church is ringing. One time when she was little, she was taking a bath. I was helping her, and my dad called me. This is called my father calls during my daughter's bath. He's on the side porch. He just wanted to tell me like this memory. He just remembered this thing from when I was a little kid. And he's like, "I want to call you and tell you about this." So he's out on the side porch, which is open to the south meadow, as a storm booms through. And do I remember running to him? "Daddy, Daddy, can we go sit in the garage and watch the storm?" I'd help him put the door up, and we'd sit in lawn chairs, feel the thunder in the floor, watch water rush down Amberley Road. She squawks in my face. He cackles in my ear, and I span to heed the arc that beams and fades and crackles again. Here's a drive with all of us to go see my dad in southwestern Virginia. Driving down I-81, heading south. And you'll hear a couple of names of some very obscure Virginia towns. It's a quote. The title's a quote from the Carter family, one of the Carter family songs. It's called "Clinch Mountain Home," from like the 1920s or 30s. So it's called "Many Years Ago We Parted from the Sunny Mountainside." On the east side of I-81, sunflowers are jading, but still tall as me. On the west side, 3 silos, empty now, but much taller. After hours amidst the armada of semis, I must be tripping. They're just rectangles and cylinders floating south along the highway. The map abstracts terrain, reduces distances, makes of water and wood ink, obliterates texture, and yet preserves like little else. Can I so recreate white haze on the dark eastern ridge? Not so much. Only the names retain the touch of place. Buffalo Gap, Mint Spring, Hornet Road, Dooms. Some deaths sprawl as long as an official blowhard speechification, and others are quicker than snapping a string bean. All right. I think I'm jumping to the end of the book. I think I'm skipping a whole bunch of stuff in here now. Let me just double check. I think. Oh, I'm glad I looked. I usually read covers at my readings. I read at least one by somebody else that I admire. There's this great press called Bull City Press. There might be a joke in that name. I'm not sure. In Durham, North Carolina. And they've switched now from being like a little teeny magazine to a quarterly chapbook publication. So, 4 times a year, just like many literary magazines, instead of putting together an assembly of however many people, they just put together a little, average like 12-page thing of various fiction people, poets, nonfiction, etc. So this is one from C.T. Salazar's. It's called This Might Have Meant Fire. And there's this poem that's kind of spread out in 3 parts. It's really short throughout the book, called Ghazal or Guzzle, the ancient Arabic form, at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. So I'm going to read all 3 little pieces of it as if it's one. It goes together well. If you don't know anything about ghazals, the only thing that matters, I guess, for hearing this is it's written in couplets, and the end of the second line of every couplet is supposed to be the same word. So you'll hear ocean a lot. Gazelle at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. Darling, wade. Meet with your waist the ocean. Like thirsty Calypso, taste the ocean. Now Ahab won't find me here. My wrecked coast, my black harpoon heart, my face the ocean. Jellyfish glow like blue lava flow, like a trance. Love, won't you embrace the ocean? You threw Genesis overboard and told me, look, the garden flooded, Adam and Eve, an ocean. Instructions for how to write your drowned lover. First, glass of water. Second, grieve an ocean. I left God. I put my trust in the ocean. Now all the barges rust in the ocean. I am not dead. I am not dead. I'm just a little lost. I'm just in the ocean. I hear them in my dreams. The shipwrecked sing, mercy, come visit us in the ocean. You all right? I'm gonna do two more from the book and then a couple of quick new ones, newer ones. This is called Lake Tiles. It goes back and forth between lines and short paragraphs. It's me going with my son, just rowing a boat around this place called Murrow Lake, but also thinking back to a similar lake in a similar part of Virginia and some memories of my dad's. And I got to work in a song lyric and some references to history and religion and so forth. So this is Lake Tiles. Rowing into Windwake, the hup and slap of hull and water are all over each other. All because of a blue dragonfly's draft. A worn oar slips from its wobbly lock. Time cuts loose, a bubble pops. Decades ago, my father was a boy at Ferrystone, the water cold and Johnny Cash driving the air. I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep my eyes wide open all the time. I keep the ends out for the tie that binds. Just a few years back, entering the park, he hops out of the car, springs into the gift shop, and returns with a magic stone for my wife. You take off this hat in August heat. The past is, and the future will be fine without my attention on this here breeze. The stones were formed when a messenger brought news of the crucifixion. The fairies wept and their tears crystallized into crosses, possession of which is protection against illness, accident, or curse. For you, I know I'd even try to turn the tide. Conduit for skin and air is water smeared on your face in back pond. They were formed by heat and pressure, such as was present millions of years ago during the formation of the Allegheny Mountains. Similar stones can be found all over the world, but nowhere are they more abundant or strikingly cross-shaped than in Stewart, Virginia. This combination of iron, silica, and aluminum, known as brown starlight, which crystallizes in the shape of a cross. Drifting way out in the middle to snack, almonds and cranberries are good, but Oreos are blessing. 15 yards east of us, a loon dives. We wait for it to resurface, but minutes and minutes pass. So we turn west, and there it is, now 40 yards away, bobbing along. That's what we gave up on. Now I hear what I saw, red-stemmed lily pads hissing along the hull. Love that frets love, whirligigs zag the surface, we zig. Finally, from the book, the last one is called Rising to a Wedding Across from Mount Hood, Oregon. I went out there, my cousin was getting married, and it was a whirlwind trip. I left one day, stayed there the next day, and then flew back the following day. I mean, I was there something like 40, not even 40 hours, I don't know. And timing and all, it was only me that could go, couldn't bring my wife or kids. And it was there that it hit me big that I'm attached to people. Like I couldn't enjoy my trip quite as much as you see that? I couldn't enjoy the trip. I enjoyed it, but I didn't enjoy it as much because my direct family now wasn't there. And I wasn't expecting that. I mean, I was expecting to miss them, but I was also expecting to enjoy being, just on my own. And I did, but it was still just like, it was awful in a way, being away from them. It's weird. So a few images from that weekend. From the chairlift center pole, a strand of gossamer waves in sunlight. On the opposite coast, her black hair silvers my chest. This morning, walking a tightly wooded neighborhood's hill threaded with acrid smoke, the sweat came and the hangover passed. As we dip and swell, lull and slip, moss grows on a boulder and the tips of Douglas firs glow. At certain elevations, the temperature swoons, the ceremony all sky. I touch her neck, she closes her eyes, quicken at the glimpse of skin. After the alpine slide, the attendant with tiger stripes tattooed on his head will high-five me, palm to palm, breath to breath. Back home, goldenrod fills the late August woods. Okay, I'm going to do sort of three as one group and be done. These are newer ones. The first, I grew up on a road called Amberley Road. What else do you need to know? The second one is called Postseason, and I touch on an ugly habit, an ugly quality of my grandmother's. Even though she was one of the best people in my life, there were certain ugly qualities because people are complicated. And the third one is I don't normally write like directly topical things, but not long after the previous administration was inaugurated, I was thinking about that news, and I was also thinking about news that I read of an Italian hotel that had been buried in an avalanche, and seen photographs. And so this third one, I'll read them kind of as one medley to close. It goes back and forth between inauguration and America things and images from the avalanche in Italy. In the middle of Amberley Road, I was 6 when our old neighbor Jim told me not to end so many sentences with man, because I sounded like them colored boys. I told Jim I didn't care, but I ended my sentence there. Postseason. As he avoids a close play, the plate, and makes the call, the ump's arms slash out wide 3 times. Safe, safe, safe. And during the replay, my grandmother laughs from the bottom of her lungs. He's like a darn buzzard a-hopping. I loved her extra then, that country joy, but I don't reminisce as often of her reaction to Aretha's rendition of the anthem. Oh, I can't stand it when they sing all black like that. The L lashing as it does. The tongue raised and coiled, gathering tension behind those top 2 front teeth, and then released. Those short A's and the last 3 words, hard, full stops, K, K, T. There was something different in her lungs then. Something in between a shiver and a gurgle, arms crossed. Something not safe. When an American president took office, an Italian hotel was destroyed. When I asked Ma what Kenny Rogers meant when he sang, "The best that you can hope for is to die in your sleep," she just said, "Because you don't feel anything." I was 5, riding with her and Poppy in his leased Oldsmobile. He conserved sticks of gum by tearing them in half, wrapper and all. 4 earthquakes are the trigger for snowy rubble cascading down the hotel stairway, around white pillars like current around a mid-river tree. Pummeled by a meter of snow thousands of miles away, my nerves are wiggy. We're advised to multiply efforts and work to reach trapped people both here and in the neighboring hamlets, but we have been abandoned by everyone is the new top download on iTunes. Power knocked out cuts both ways. Block this, isolate that, grab here, dismissed there. Because you don't feel anything. Skylights crack beneath the weight of above. Hey, at least this. If I die in my sleep, or my children wide awake, snowfall will tremor on with only roof peaks and one row of windows visible, indivisible. Conserve your mintiest gum, fair citizens, lest your halls too are gutted by cascades of whiteness. I appreciate it. Thanks a bunch.
Oh, thank you, Andy. Let's give a silent Zoom hand. You'll get the applause later. That was wonderful. I have so many questions to ask you a little bit later. So what I did want to do right now is read what's on the back of your book. So this is the front of Andy's book, across from now, and it's a really interesting picture, which I want to ask you about. So here's what Carolyn Forche, a poet that many of us have heard of, says about Andy's book. She says, Andy Fogle's poetry is a lighthouse, a boat ticket, a last seat, and a way out. He has what few have, knowledge of the enigma of the poem, its mysterious interiority, its final yes. As long as I've known his work, I've admired it and recognized him as a born poet, someone among us to be read and for whose presence in our midst to be grateful. Thank you, Andy, for your startling lucidity. So there you go. Wow.
My favorite part of that is the final yes. You know, that's the part that I love best. Is
yeah. Yeah. We love it too. Yeah. Yeah. And somebody, yeah. So Jen is really missing you. Yeah. You know, the other thing about your poetry is it just brings the place is so strong. Obviously, it's a book about place. But for me, it really brought back upstate New York, where I lived in Albany in college. So that was cool.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, you didn't know that. So now you do. And thanks to your daughter for being there too.
Oh yes, she's happy to perform.
Yeah. So do you write poetry too?
Not really.
Once or twice.
Okay. Yeah.
Plays a steel drum.
Someday. Yeah. Okay.
Mountain bikes. This is her mountain biking hat.
Okay, got it. Yeah. All right. Well, so let me introduce Jeanne. And I love how people are in these readings. People are getting paired up kind of by at random. I think I did it based on when the book was published, when your book was published. And what I love about that is the way that two people can read together, and the diversity of the poetry is really profoundly amazing, and also the way it fits together, which was by accident. So let me talk to you about Jeanne Wagner. She's native of San Francisco, a retired tax accountant, graduated from UC Berkeley with a degree in German, and has an MA in humanities from San Francisco State University. She's the author of 4 chapbooks. These are prolific folks we have here, and 2 full-length collections. Let's see, the Zen Piano-Mover from NFSPS Press, and let's see, and then In the Body of Our Lives from 16 Rivers Press. She's published a lot. She's well endowed with awards, and but what we're going to talk about today is her latest book, published by Grayson Books. It's called Everything Turns into Something Else, and this book is a collection of poems about borders, dualities, and ambivalence. Let me show you the cover. Can you see that? I don't have my screen. Is that visible? So yeah. Okay, so that's Jeanne's book, and so while Jeanne is reading, what you might be able to notice that and of course both of these authors, the poems can be read so many times, and you get so much out of each reading. And with Jeanne's poetry, I think this idea of everything turns into something else is so profoundly woven into the book, into the poetry, the borders, dualities, and ambivalence, that as I was reading it, I began to feel like, nothing really is what I think it is, and I think I'm hoping that's kind of what you wanted to get across there. So so let me now give the mic over to Jeanne.
Okay, thank you, Phyllis, for that lovely introduction and for organizing this wonderful reading and giving me the opportunity to read your poetry and Andy's poetry. I really admire poets who can write about, well, like Phyllis, who can write poems that really interact with the world and the news, and poetry of place, and poetry that involves real people. My poetry kind of gets a little far out there. So I really want to thank you for inviting me. I will start with a poem. Let's see if I can bring it up here. I've got to find my poetry here, but the first poem I'm going to read is, since I wanted to do something topical, and I think it's still tax season now, they've extended it. And as Phyllis read, I used to be a tax accountant, and last year, before I retired, we had a special seminar about depreciation. So I wrote this poem about it. And essentially, in depreciation, when you have an asset, a business has an asset, there's a certain period of years assigned by the IRS that you can use for depreciation. The shorter the number of years, the bigger the write-off. So that's what this seminar was about. And I like to say that this is probably one of the best poems ever written about tax depreciation. And the title is Discussing Useful Life at the Tax Depreciation Seminar. I remember a line by David Baker. The useful life of a parking garage is 15 years, unless its roof is the floor of the building above it, in which case it's 39. Office furniture is 7, the stove 5, and the fax machine 5. But if the machine has wires embedded in the wall behind it, so they ease through the wall like veins, it can make that wall part of the machine, thus 5, as if there's a contagion there, a life-changing symbiosis, one function conspiring with the other, because they're too close to be segregated, like the heart, feeding its blue canals, or the way the lungs recycle breath, intangible and therefore amortized, whereas eyes, attached by a nerve, can be pulled out from the skull like a stove from the wall, though vision seems to take place outside the body, as if eyes are really windows of the soul. Windows, 39, but 27 and a half if residential, which makes sense, because some days we're an office, some days a home. But this moment, I'm looking out the window distracted by a bee working a cherry blossom as it wobbles in the March wind. Ah, working. That tree is an office, 39. And those bees Descartes would have called soulless machines are 5, like all soulless machines. But look at the way the bee moves her body, synchronizing with the tremble of the blossom as it shakes from a wind that soon will tear each pink bud away from its branch, just as I will leave from a garage whose roof is both roof and floor. There is nothing that does not connect and so sustain. I feel my hand racing up. How many years, I ask, is the wind? The next poem I'm going to read is called The Personal History of Glass. This is one of the many poems I've read about my mother's, who is an alcoholic. I've run into glass doors, which looks funny from the other side. But that's the whole point of transparency. You don't see the other side coming. Don't see the skylight fall. Don't see your own goblet tip, grab it with wine. Sometimes I want to drink the glass, along with the liquid, the air, clarity like citrus, edgy on the tongue. My grandmother told me my mother drank because she loved the shape of the bottle, the curve of the glass cool against her palm, the slender necks, the lovely sloping shoulders. She drank fast because ice, too, is fragile, easily dilutes, easily diluted, cloudy, crazed with shattered lines like silvery fireworks frozen at the core. I broke her favorites, pink Rose of Sharon champagne glasses, the color of rinsed blood in the drain. I couldn't stop the curtain from billowing, from backhanding the whole row, so her heirlooms no longer loomed in the air, but lay there in pieces. We never finished a meal in peace, because every break in transparency shows the way white shows every stain. Excuse me a minute, I gotta let in my cat. Sorry about that. I've got a bossy cat here that doesn't give me any peace. One of the things I'd like to write about is folklore and myths. And like many poets nowadays, a lot of the myths I write about, I put them into a contemporary setting. This one's about the Sirens who were had the head of a woman and the bodies of birds and would lure sailors to their death with their tempting songs. We were sirens. Like all hybrids, we were liminal. We were child women, bird women, nobody's daughters. We were birds of prey. We prayed to be beautiful. We believed in seduction as a victimless crime. We hung out on beaches and boardwalks, on piers and sidewalks, on porch swings and perch swings. We milled through the parks, the malls. At home, we wrapped our new bodies in fables, in pious cages of silk, in soft libidinous songs. In spring, we envied the swallows who whirl like lariats over freshly sown fields. In summer, we dreamed of sailors, of sinners. We listened to the sound of speedboats skimming the bay, our ears tuned to the thrum of escape. We were bird-made, we're bridesmaid. We dived down so fast our hearts became weightless. Our throats made shrieks like stukas splitting the air. Some heard this as a warning, some as a wail. Still, others knew it was song. I hope you're not, can't hear and aren't distracted by the sounds of my cat is crunching away right here on the table. This next poem is about a friend of mine who, after his wife died, he started having dreams where they were one person. After losing her, he feels there should be two of him now, like Hermaphroditus, the statue they saw together in the Louvre, reclining on its side, an alabaster slope of shoulder and hip, sweet, unsuckled breasts, the way the body curled in itself and made them want to walk around and see the other side, where the soft apostrophe of his sex lay nestled against a thigh, like a dream of brake ferns coiling at the tip. Lately, he finds himself looking for seams, soft clefts where an embryo's mirrored sides weren't sealed. He scans the palettes of orphans in magazines, the silent palaver of their tongues, their unhealed mouths laid open like a flower. Sometimes sound is just air forced through gouges of matter. He listens to the harmonics of hardness and hollow, thinks of the one-armed pianist, Paul Wittgenstein, who learned to play both parts on the piano, an empty sleeve tucked inside his pocket. He wants to be that sleeve and to be the good left arm. Or could he be the geese he's read about, who, when they grieve, sing both halves of their old duets after their mate has died? This next poem is about a motel called the Flamingo Motel, a really kind of seedy motel near the campus in Berkeley. And it's where parents sometimes stayed at times of the year when they were taking their kids. Other times of the year, it was kind of a no-tell motel. And I was surprised to hear that when we were having dinner next door one night, a friend told me that Einstein had stayed in this hotel. I'm sorry, not Einstein, but someone had brought Einstein's brain to the hotel. And that was a fascinating fact. And about a week later, when I was at a bookstore, I found in the remaindered section the book by Michael Paternini called about driving Einstein's brain. So that's pretty fascinating. And I, of course, had to write a poem about it. And it's called Einstein in the Flamingo Motel. And this is the epigraph here. In 2000, Einstein's brain, removed during an autopsy in 1955, was driven across country to Berkeley, California by journalist Michael Paterniti. They're tearing down the place where Einstein stayed. 2 stories of flamingo pink stucco, a cartoon bird perched on the sign. Of course, it wasn't the genius himself who checked in, but his brainchild. Sprung some 45 years before from his own forehead, like a stillborn god. And like a god, chopped into pieces and scattered, or at least sectioned and sliced like head cheese and sealed in a mason jar. I'd like to think of him, though, coming to this seedy motel as pilgrim, not relic, the sad old eyes taking in the tacky ambience and not turning away. There must have been times after those long ago nights of philandering when he woke into depleted rooms like these, into the ineffectual mass of his morning body. Love sounds dissipating through thinnish walls, sweat and cum on the bed sheets, cigarette smoke like spent nebulae clinging to the ceiling tiles. Lover of the constant, inconstant lover, where in the jarred brain were the beautiful equations then, their language of equivalence failing as metaphor. Electrons have stopped coursing through the pink neon coils, but the sign's still there, a travesty of real flamingos when they flock by the thousands on the salt lakes. Then rises one in a coral-colored cloud, a vision of feathers and billowing bone, their wings thwacking the air with a sound like starched light. Okay, this next now, something really different is this next poem. It's a poem about shoplifting. One time when I was in England and many times in other places, I'm a browser. I walk around stores staring at things. And I've often been stopped by people in the store and, coming over thinking I'm shoplifting, which I never have. And in England, they even had the police and took my husband and I outside, and crowds stood around us as they went through my purse and my all our pockets. It was really humiliating. So, of course, I had to write a poem out of it. It's called Why I'm Often Suspected of Shoplifting. I must look like a thief wandering the aisles, eyes skimming over scarves, their silks rippling like sea anemones. My eyes in the farmer's market, stroking the golden bulge of a mango or the violet skin of Concords hanging from their chandelier clusters. In Saks once, a clerk came up and stood beside me, gave me a restraining glance as my eyes ogled the opal buttons on a blue voile blouse, caressed its collar with all the concentration of a back window voyeur. Maybe it's because the eyes are natural predators. Our orbital limbs are feral, are the fingers, the paws of the mind pacing over open grasslands with intent to devour. The nuns always cautioned us to keep custody of our eyes, as if we could make them file daily reports. Wear shackles, stay downcast, stay lidded, stay sealed like lips that don't ask, won't tell. I was only browsing, I wanted to say to the clerk, my mouth full of new shoots, a bit of tender bark, some smallish buds. This is one of the last ones I read, and I like to do a lot of fairy tales, but this one's a little lighter than my other poems, and this is an incident that actually happened to me. I have it with my mother in this poem, but actually happened to me in school when I was about in second grade, and they were reading a story of the Big Bad Wolf, and they asked, how many here, your favorite character is the wolf? And my hand shot up. And I looked around the room and I realized I was the only person there that had picked the wolf. And I thought, uh-oh. But I love the drawings of the wolves. And I tried to pick that up in my poems. And this is called Little Golden Books. When Mother asks who my favorite character is, I say, the wolf. She starts to frown, so I tell her, I like to see a wolf in drag, his scraggly fur tucked down under a frill of lacy nightcap. a single bead of slaver dripping from one tapered yellow fang. I don't tell her how I've had my full of little Miss Hood, her smug blonde head bobbing down the lane, hair the like me yellow of a daffodil. Still, I want to trade my camo coat for one with the come hither red of insect-ravaged roses, the kind that nightly slip their petals to the ground. Mother says we should keep our bleeding on the inside where it belongs, should never wear the scarlet that runs beneath the skin. And we'll talk about the blood in his chin when you're older. The last one, I think I have one more I'll read, is called Dogs That Look Like Wolves. And that's written about my dog, who people often ask if sometimes used to if my dog's part wolf. And one time even asked if my dog was a werewolf, which was really rude. But my dog is a great singer, and I wrote this poem, Dogs That Look Like Wolves. When my dog hears the neighbor's baby cry, he begins to howl, his head thrown back. He's all heartbreak and hollow throat, tenderness rising in each ululation. He's a saxophone of sadness, a shepherd calling for his stray. I've read that baying is both a sign of territory and a reaching out for whatever lies beyond, home and loss. How can they be understood without each other? Once I had an outdoor dog who sang every day at noon when the Angelus belled from the corner church. She was a plain dog, but I could prove, contrary to all the theologians, that at least once a day she had a soul. I've always loved dogs that look like wolves, loved stories of wolves, the alphas, the bullies, bachelors. We have to forgive them when they break into our fenced-off pastures, lured by the lull of a grazing herd or a complacent flock. Heads bent down, prey, it's called. At night, wolves chorus into the trackless air, the range of their songwriting far from their bodies till they think the stars will hear it and be moved, almost to breaking, while my poor dog stands alone on the deck, howling into the canyon's breath, as if he's like me, looking for a place his song will carry. Dogs know if there is solace to be had, their voice will find it. This air is made for lamentation. Thank you.
Wow, Jeanne. Wow. So everybody, now we can unmute. And let's give both of them a round of real applause. Wow. So how about if, does anyone have a comment you want to make? I saw some things in the chat. Let's get a discussion going. I certainly have questions and comments. Does anyone else want to say anything about what you just heard? Amazing. Well, let me see.
Beautiful.
Yeah, go ahead.
Both beautiful readings, wonderful readings. So both moving, just great. I'm so glad I came.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. Anyone else? Well, I think we're all kind of just going, wow, that's what's in the chat.
Mhm.
We're all a little bit speechless. Yeah. So So maybe I'll get the conversation going with a question or two. What I wanted to ask both of you is, what's your process for writing a poem? How do you do that? I know we're all really different, and there's also poets here in the room with us. So let's see if we can talk about that a little bit.
Since high school, I've carried around one of these little notebooks. I started doing it really just imitating Jack Kerouac. I read that he did that and saw photographs of him, and he was my hero in high school. And then it turned out to be really practical. I don't really write much in it anymore, except for like grocery lists and little, just everyday notes. But there's still this habit, of like, I don't know, for maybe half of my stuff that it's just piling up fragments, lines, pieces of memories in other notebooks. And I don't know, a few times a year, it sounds like one Larapin Apple pen. A few times a year, just going through and trying to find things that go interestingly with each other, or things to, just kind of run with in a single direction. And then maybe half the time, half the other time, I get an idea and sort of run straight with it. I tend to do that more, since, I don't know, more in my last 5 or 10 years, maybe 5 years, I tend to write more kind of just straightforward. Here's a memory, here's a thought, and go with it, rather than assembling all of these images over a long period of time. And
you write more than one. You're doing several projects at the same time. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess because I just have this habit of often doing a little bit. I'm not one of those. I wish I could be one of those writers that devotes, like Flannery O'Connor, 9 a.m. to noon every day. I wish I could do that, but circumstances and maybe even my own temperament right now just prevent that. But I think because of having, for 30 years, since 10th grade, just this habit of constantly piling up whatever, when I review my notebooks, they're like just these distinct bodies of things. These are more family poems, these are more political things, these are more experimental and wacky, and I'm working on co-translations with a friend of mine in Egypt. And then I heard 10 years ago, some people had talked with Yusuf Komunyakaa, and he said, and he apparently does the same thing. He kind of has at least 3 different manuscripts going, 3 different books that he's working on at any given time. And another poet of mine, Brian Gilmore, does the same thing. And I just thought, okay, maybe that's what maybe that's what I do. And it works out that way. Sometimes it goes a long spell between any little collection getting finished, because there's so many different things. But then a few will be finished within, a year or so. It's a strange
rhythm. Fall into place somehow.
It's a strange rhythm.
Yeah.
Most of the circumstance that dominates it.
Yeah. So how about you, Jeanne? Is it?
Well, I don't keep a journal. I wish I did. It sounds like a great idea. And I bought various journals, and people have given me very beautiful journals, and they wind up being put in a cupboard and never used. Usually what starts a poem, when I try to think of what to write, is some memory that's often an odd memory, something that's persisted for a long time. Like, for instance, my grandmother saying about my mother that she'd say, well, she never really liked alcohol. I think it was just the shape of the bottle that made her drink. Even as a child, I thought that was pretty funny. The idea of the sort of sensuous confirmation of the bottle making you drink. And when I think of something like that, then I start writing. and sometimes nothing happens, but often it's the process of writing itself that produces the poem. That when I'm writing, associations come that don't normally come to me. So unfortunately, I don't have exactly projects because the poems come, my last 3 poems, for instance, let's see, one it's about bees, blue flowers coming from bees. One is about the year we visited Paris a couple years ago right before COVID. And another one was about when I broke my arm. They have nothing to do with each other and not even in the same style. But after you get forward 50 or 60 poems together, you find similarities in them, and they sort of sort themselves either into chapbooks or separate sections of the book.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you were talking about the glass, when I was reading the personal history of glass, the poem of yours, that line about the shape of the glass really, it really got into me in a certain way. I could feel the bottle, so that was very effective.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Susan has a question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. I noticed that both of you, something I admired about both of you was your honesty and your courage in writing about things within your own family. In your case, Andy, about your grandmother and racism, and Jeanne, her mother, and alcoholism. And I wondered whether you had to work your way up to that, whether that was something that you've done all the time you've written since you've been writing poems, or what kind of internal conversation you might have had before doing that.
It's something that attracted me from the very beginning. Again, I remember reading Jack Kerouac, and he was the first person that I read that I thought, just certain little lines and observations, I thought like, oh, that's exactly, I think that too. And then later it was Frank O'Hara with his I do this, I do that poems, and just making things out of your everyday experience. But it probably took me a long time to get to race directly in my poems. I mean, I have, like, there are some uglier things in other poems that I didn't read that I think are finished, and I send them out and so forth, but I'm not quite there to do them live. That's been harder for me to kind of gut up and look at. They're memories that I've thought about forever, that have often floated around in my head, but partially since my mom died a year and a half ago, I think that's really like the first, somewhere in the last 2 years where I really started trying to face that stuff. And it is hard to, I don't want to hurt anybody's, the spirit's memories, my grandmother in many ways, almost every other way, was just a mind-blowingly great person. So I don't know, it's ongoing, and it's rough looking at the, the ugliness within the people that I come from and that I love. I love these people who have ugliness, in them. It's a curious situation to be in.
I'm glad you got there. I mean, it's worthwhile.
Thanks. I believe it. Yeah.
Very strong. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that I really liked that poem by Andy's, and I like the idea of writing a poem about someone that you love and someone that does things you really disapprove of, and that you can combine them, especially in this day, in the politics today, where just mentioning things, you practically get hate mail and people, talk about killing you. I mean, it's important to know that everyone has both these things inside them, and they're part of the same country. Um, they're part of all of us, and we become too factionalized. So I really appreciated that poem from Andy.
Thanks. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the more that I read poetry, it seems to me that probably just about everybody who writes has something dark they need to write about, and it always for me it brings me so much closer. It connects me to what the person is experiencing. So I always appreciate it when people can write about things that are hard.
Fortunately for me, my parents were quite old when I was born, and so by the time I started writing, my father had had a stroke and my mother was dead. And I felt secure that none of my relatives ever read my poetry or had any inclination to. So I felt a lot more freedom. That indifference is kind of liberating.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. So I have some thoughts about how we can continue there. But we may run over. So I don't know how that is for people. If you can stay around, I'd like to just ask a little bit more about specific poems that both of you read. We had thought about doing that, and I thought it might be really interesting. So, if you need to leave, please do, and I'll really thank you all for coming. And then, if we do run a little bit over, it'd be really great if people could stay also. Um, so I was thinking, Andy, maybe we could start with your poem, "The Lake Tiles," because now, would you consider that one of your postmodernist poems?
In the sense that it's
Uh-huh.
collagey. It's collecting different pieces of things. I suppose I could probably have taken any one of the sections of it and gone just directly into a poem about that. It's one of the early ones, not quite as I don't know, multi-eyed as some other ones, which are much longer and are, I think, better on the page than they are in the air. But yeah, that's definitely one of them, an early one where I was, and at least in a certain kind, there was probably there was a different kind of way that I was influenced by postmodernism, 20 years ago. Now it's settled into something different. So a different type of being influenced by it.
So you were telling me about something kind of high bun like.
Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. Haibun, those are, it's an ancient Japanese form where you have a prose section. I believe the most famous example of is Basho's on the road to the narrow north, something like that, the narrow road to the north, something like that. And it lends itself to travel logs, to traveling poems about place and the people that you bump into and the little happenstance, which again suits both my circumstances and temperament. And it was just there'll be this prose section which will describe some place, some sort of travels, some sort of journey, and then there will be a haiku after that. And so it just mixes verse and prose.
I see.
That's the oldest thing that I can think of that mixes verse and prose. There's CD, and then there are a bunch of other contemporary poets that I've seen and gotten to know in the last 10 or 20 years that are doing all these interesting mixes of parts of poems where the parts work in different ways, a mixing of verse and prose, or interviews or dialogues or quotations from research and scraps of history and all sorts of things. One of my favorite examples is C.D. Wright's book called One Big Self. It comes out of some visits to different prisons in Louisiana. And it's sort of part journalism, part poetry. And Lake Tiles, is me looking at two places at once, and then is also looking into a bit of history in there. And some of that history takes me to ideas about religion, and all the while I'm just rowing around on the lake with my son. But I feel that way about so many places that you visit. You can take a day trip, and I'm habitually reading all the different like placards and things and copying things down, just trying to find interesting raw material to make something with and build it up from whatever I find. They're kind of, in that way, they're also kind of found, they're sort of found poems. I mean, I couldn't do it without these texts that already exist and these places that you just go, let's check out this place today.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. Yeah. So the smaller stanzas, are those the haibun-like ones, or
Well, a haibun is the combination of a prose section plus a haiku. That one thing is called a haibun.
Oh, okay.
And I have these Lake Tiles and then some other longer ones. I sometimes have called them extended haibun sequences. I mean, it's like a cumbersome title. In my head, as I'm writing and pulling things together, I'm just thinking like, one of those, and I know what I mean in my head. But that's the most direct, poetic term that I can come up with, is their extended haibun sequences. And Lake Tiles is kind of a short, medium example of that mix.
Yeah. I love the part where you were singing the Johnny Cash. Yeah.
and everybody does this. You go through your life and you're reminded of something from the past and something someone else told you. That's a story my dad told me about going to that very same park when he was 10 years old, Right.
Uh-huh. And then it just comes.
Like, that water was cold up there. That water was cold out at Ferrystone.
Yeah. It's just so original the way you do it. It's really, really cool.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So how about Jeanne? Let's pick the one that you read about your mother. And let's see if we can do a little bit of the same with that one. Is that okay?
Sure.
Let's see. So as I was reading that poem, so many things came to my mind. That line about my grandmother told me my mother drank because she loved the shape of the bottle. So that you were saying that's what got you into starting to write that poem, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah. And I got that line just really kind of that's when I felt like, whoa, because the first part of it is running into glass doors. And so that's the whole point of transparency. So you've got transparency at the beginning and then again at the end. Could you say a little bit more about that? Because it's glass is transparent. Were you also thinking about alcoholism or behavior as being transparent? I'm just curious about how you were using it.
Not intentionally, though. That's an interesting idea. I kind of started thinking about glass and all my interactions with it, like my famous interaction of trying to walk through doors, which I've done several times, and the glass and breakage. I have a lot of poems about breakage. It's always been an image for me, so I brought that in. And also my fascination with always been fascinated with ice cubes, the way they look, the way they dissolve. I just thought of all these things and kind of brought them in. And yet transparency, I think I did think of it that way because in the end, I have compare it to white showing stain. So yes, transparency. It's two things. It's, we used to think of it as honesty, saying someone's very transparent. Now we also think of transparent. Now we do transparency as honesty. But back then, in my day, transparency, if you were transparent, means you could see right through the person. You could see their, their deceptiveness.
Right.
So I think there's this too. Anyway, that's kind of the way I wrote it. I think I wrote down all of my associations with glass and my ideas that sprang for them. Then I started actually writing the poem.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. Yeah, to hear about what your process was in writing it. Yeah, that and the ending. It is the white. So the white. So you have here the way the white shows every stain. That just really went right into me. I was thinking about the stains, like the stains of the rosé wine in the sink, and that blood. The feeling of blood, the cutting glass, and yeah, it just all you just wove that together at the end so beautifully. Yeah, sometimes does it just come to you, or do you have to really work at it? Like, or maybe a combination of both.
That last line you talk about just popped into my head about white, like, every stain. And there were a couple lines in the Siren poem that just came to me.
We can be
just
jealous,
like a
right?
gift. You wait for those all the time, but they're really rare.
Wow. Well, thank you. Yeah.
I love the thing where you say you found yourself listing your different associations with glass. I'm always I almost always love it when a poet hits some kind of list within their poem. There's sort of this chant-like quality. It's, just this like a soloist that like hits a certain kind of melody and like will kind of hit it again and vary it a little bit and hit it again. Hits like a sweet spot. I want to like keep playing that piece, that little piece of it over and over again.
Yeah, well, let's see. So I don't know if anyone else has any other questions, or if anybody in the audience wants to mention anything about their writing process. So can open it up for that, and if not, then we can close up, and so I'll just give you a chance to see if anybody wants to. You could raise your hand, or looks like, yeah, it looks like we could, let's, oh, Silvana, yeah, please.
I'm so grateful for this reading, and I haven't heard or seen Andy's face in 25 years. We met at a place called the 15 Minutes Club at 15th and K, downtown Washington, D.C. in the mid-90s as part of the poetry slam scene. And we were performance poets together. So spoken word, with a sort of the first wave of spoken word. And I love how it's amazing to watch a poet through the sort of course of their life. Now, I haven't seen you or heard you in 25 years, but I still see you from back then in your work now. But I also see this vulnerability and openness and honesty and bravery in the work that, it's hard for us to have maybe when we're younger. That has come in full bloom now, and it's really beautiful. So thank you. The line, I started crying on the line about the ocean. It's something like, I left God and I put my trust in the ocean. Is that the line? So
that's the cover I did. That's by C.T. Salazar, but sometimes
but the way it moves from that line is incredible. That whole poem just I had such a visceral reaction. It's absolutely beautiful. And I want to say to Jeanne that before tonight, I hadn't heard from you, and I'm rushing out to buy your book, or not rushing out. I'm rushing online to press a button
Your
to buy your
fingers,
book.
right?
You remind me so much of my poetry mother. She was like my mother. She was my professor at American University and was my mentor in poetry. The late Anne Dar. She was a World War II Women's Air Force service pilot who, in her late 40s, left her husband and started writing poems and books. And you have the same sort of directness and liminal writing and darkness and courage. You remind me of her so much, and I love your especially the Siren poem. So thank you both.
Thank you.
That's Anne Dar with 2 R's. I just looked up,
Oh
correct?
yeah. Maybe put that in the chat so people could copy it. And
Yeah.
I started writing in my late 40s too, so I have something else in common with her.
Let me
Yeah.
real quick just I don't know, bounce all of that goodness back to you, Silvana, in front of everybody, and send some honor to you and that scene. If I didn't have that half of my poetic education, I mean, I got like, I think a great education in poetry starting as an undergrad at George Mason University. That's where I met Jeff McDaniel, who pointed me towards the 15 Minutes Club and so on. You know, and that's where I met Carolyn Forche and all these great people. And I went back there for grad school. I was so lucky with my classroom undergrad and graduate academic experience. And just coincidentally, my sophomore year of college, Jeff told me about the 15 Minutes Club, and I started checking it out. And for that year or two, especially, Jen Durand, who I think might have left. I mean, she and I, or no, maybe she's still there. You know, gave me rides downtown, and we would, you know, just like to see all these people, you and DJ Renegade, and Miles David Moore and Andy Fenwick and Jose Padua, all these just kick-ass performance poets at kind of like the prime time. And you, of course, my God, you were like the tops, Silvana. I feel like I had the second, it's like I came from 2 trees. There was like the tree of George Mason University, and then this tree right next to it in the city at the 15 Minutes Club, reading to like real people, like regular customers who didn't read poetry, people at a bar. You had to kind of speak in some way to ordinary people. The audience, the public decided what was good at slams. All that was just, I mean, I'll never forget. I keep thinking about it. I'll rant and rave about it forever, but I'm going to quit in hopes that my gratitude is clear.
Yeah, wow. Well, why does each one of you have a short poem that we could close out with? Did I? Yeah, I don't know if I had asked you. I thought I had asked you, but so I don't know if you're prepared, but
I have a really short one, or I can, I have a really tiny
okay.
short.
Yeah, so let me
You had
just
mentioned doing short ones, and I thought I'm going to go as short as I can.
okay. All right.
There's a great website called One Sentence Poems. It's a fellow named Dale Wisely who runs a bunch of different publication ventures under the umbrella of right hand pointing, and one of them is called One Sentence Poems. Here's one. I used to drink so much, so often, and now my daughter teaches me to sew. That's it.
Wow, thank you. How about you, Jeanne?
I whatever I was going to read, I kind of incorporated it into the reading.
Oh,
so.
okay. All right. Well, I think it's a good place for us to stop. Yeah. And thank everybody. And it's been wonderful. It's a wonderful discussion. And I'm so glad everybody could come. And we'll have this up on YouTube So for people who couldn't make it, it'll be available, and I'll send out a link for that as soon as we have it ready. So thank you all so much. Yeah, such wonderful poets. Yay, Grayson. And
Sure.
hopefully we'll see you all next time.